The Industrial Revolution prompted massive migration from rural areas to urban centers as people sought employment in factories and industries. Cities like London, Manchester, and Birmingham experienced explosive population growth. This rapid urbanization outpaced the development of adequate housing and infrastructure, leading to the creation of densely populated slums. Slums were characterized by extreme overcrowding. Multiple families often lived in single rooms, and entire buildings were packed with tenants. Lack of proper sanitation was a major issue. Slums typically had inadequate sewage systems, leading to the accumulation of waste in streets and water sources. The quality of housing in slums was extremely poor. Buildings were often poorly constructed, with little ventilation, light, or space. Many structures were prone to collapse and fires. Access to clean water was limited. Residents often relied on contaminated sources, contributing to the spread of diseases. The living conditions in slums were hazardous to health. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and contaminated water contributed to the spread of infectious diseases such as cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and smallpox. Infant mortality rates were high, and life expectancy was significantly lower in slum areas compared to wealthier neighborhoods. Slum residents were predominantly from the working class, employed in factories, mines, and other industrial jobs. These jobs often involved long hours, low wages, and dangerous working conditions. Despite being employed, many workers lived in poverty due to insufficient wages and the high cost of living in cities. High levels of poverty and unemployment in slums often led to crime and social unrest. Petty theft, violence, and prostitution were common in these areas. The lack of social services and support systems exacerbated the challenges faced by slum dwellers. The dire conditions in city slums drew attention from social reformers, philanthropists, and writers. Notable figures like Charles Dickens highlighted the plight of the urban poor in works such as Oliver Twist and Bleak House. Reform movements advocated for improvements in housing, sanitation, and working conditions. Organizations like the Salvation Army and settlement houses provided support and services to slum residents. The British government began to address the public health crisis in the mid-19th century. The Public Health Act of 1848 established the General Board of Health and aimed to improve sanitary conditions in cities. Subsequent legislation, such as the Public Health Act of 1875, mandated the provision of clean water, proper sewage systems, and the regulation of housing standards. The Housing of the Working Classes Act of 1885 and later acts aimed to improve housing conditions for the urban poor. These laws allowed local authorities to clear slums and build better quality housing. Model dwellings and social housing projects were developed to provide safer and more hygienic living conditions. Over time, the concerted efforts of reformers, legislation, and urban planning led to gradual improvements in living conditions in city slums. Advances in public health, sanitation, and housing standards contributed to the decline of many of the worst slums by the early 20th century. Despite improvements, urban poverty and inadequate housing remain challenges in many cities. The legacy of industrial slums influenced later urban development and planning. Modern slums, particularly in developing countries, continue to face similar issues of overcrowding, poor sanitation, and inadequate infrastructure. The city slums of the Industrial Revolution were a stark contrast to the era's technological and economic advancements. They highlighted the social and human costs of rapid industrialization and urbanization. The conditions in these slums spurred significant social and legislative reforms, shaping the future of urban development and public health.